All right, now we're going to look at the different phases of digestion, right? So digestive system's function is you eat something, you break it down, you absorb it, and then you flush it out, right? And this is all broken down into 3 specific phases. And so if we talk about the 3 specific phases, the first phase, you can call it cephalic, oral, or buccal phase. This is the first phase, involves before any kind of digestive molecules being presented to you, meaning you didn't eat anything yet. This is your cephalic phase. During your cephalic phase, this is where what happens. You think about a food, you think about a taco, a pizza, a kebab, Chinese food, right? I'm trying to keep everything culturally sensible to not offend anybody. So during the cephalic phase, when you start thinking about the food, what happens? What do you notice? Or if you see the food, you begin to salivate. There is a specific cranial nerve number 10. Do you remember what that one is? The vagus nerve. The vagus nerve stimulates your salivary glands to increase saliva production, right? So this is 10. So you have an increase salivation. And also some other factor happens. Your body begins to prepare for a food, so you need more acid. There's a hormone that is also being stimulated. It's called gastrin. Gastrin is released by these G cells upon stimulation from the vagus nerve. And gastrin's main role is to stimulate the parietal cells to begin the production of stomach acid, hydrochloric acid, right? So you finish cephalic phase and then you put something in your mouth. Now you're eating whatever food you decided to choose. And now you begin the gastric phase. So the gastric phase now involves certain reflexes that we're going to talk about in a second. You have myenteric and vagovagal reflexes. Myenteric, involving all of the muscle of the digestive system, and the vagovagal reflex. Both of these receptors, these reflexes, allow for the proper transmittance and the transfer of foods down into the GI tract. What else gets secreted during the gastric phase? What's really important? These reflexes allow, again, further amplifies this hydrochloric acid release. But also, there's other hormones that are being secreted during this time. And the specific hormones that, again, are being hyperamplified, right? So in the cephalic phase, we saw there's a high production of these gastrin molecules. So gastrin, again, increases as well during the gastric phase. So again, you have more hydrochloric acid, just like in the cephalic phase. But also, you also increase histamine. Histamine plays another big role in production of acid. So histamine and gastrin begin release during the gastric phase, right? So you're receiving all this material that has been masticated down and through the process of swallowing or deglutination enters the stomach. Now it needs to be further broken down with the acids. So you have your different acids coming in. And so hydrochloric acid is very important. After the gastric phase, food enters the intestinal phase, right? So the stomach now converts this bolus into chyme. Chyme, it goes through the pyloric sphincter and enters the small intestine, beginning the intestinal phase. And so what happens in the intestinal phase? So majority of the intestinal phase, you have further breakdown of material, but this is where you have majority of your absorption that takes place, right? And so in the intestinal phase, you have certain hormones, again, also being released, CCK and secretin, chylocylkinin and cholecystokinin and secretin. And these functions, if you remember from the previous videos, that CCK's main function is to allow for the contraction of gallbladder to increase bile, and also stimulating the acinar cells in the pancreas to secrete all the digestive enzymes. Secretin, again, also helps with the amplification of bile production by the liver, but also plays a big role in stimulating the pancreas to secrete its exocrine hormones like bicarbonate in order to neutralize the acid. Chyme is very acidic, very low pH. You need to neutralize that, or else that can lead to certain kinds of ulcers and ulcerations. And so what's really important about these, these also play a big role in inhibiting these different reflexes. So CCK and secretin together promote the inhibition of certain peristaltic responses, causes a lot of these movements of the chyme into the small intestine in order to further neutralize and further allow for proper absorption, or else everything just gets flushed through. And so when we look at these different responses, when we look at if we were talking about a sympathetic versus a parasympathetic. So if you remember sympathetic, this was a flight or fight response. Sympathetic response usually has an inhibition in intestinal activity, whereas parasympathetic, right, so this is the rest and digest, this actually has a stimulatory activity on the intestinal phase. So these neurological pathways can also play a big role in innervating the different phases of digestion.